Welcome to another one of Mr. C's History Hits. Today's history hit comes to us from the Battle of Balaclava in September of 1854. The Battle of Balaclava is part of the Crimean War, and if you've never heard of the Crimean War before, that's not really a big surprise. Most people haven't. But you have heard of Florence Nightingale. This is the war that gives us Florence Nightingale and several advances in medical technology that are going to be important later on in the American Civil War, among other places. The Battle of Balaclava is fought around the harbor of Balaclava, which is on the Crimean Peninsula. It's a strategically important piece that juts out into the Black Sea. And it's commanded by, at least mostly, by the Russians under Nicholas the Great. The Ottoman Turks, however, who have historically held a large part of this area, want to liberate the town of Sevastopol and most of the Crimean Peninsula because it's strategically important to them, too, for trade purposes. The British have agreed to help them, and they've landed 24,000 troops at the harbor of Balaclava and sighted some of their guns on the ridges that ring the port. The Russians are intent on recapturing these heights and driving the British Expeditionary Force back into the sea. The Battle of Balaclava starts with the Russians attacking the British right flank and attacking some of these redoubts that sit on top of these hills. They're sort of fortified positions, not really forts exactly, certainly not castles, but positions of strength on which you normally sight guns. And the British have sighted a number of their guns along the top of this ridge to command a wide valley that's just to the other side. The Russians make an attack on this force, and the British are thrown back, mostly because Baron Raglan, who is commanding the British forces, doesn't believe the Russians are actually going to come. He's had a lot of reports of Russian troop movements and stuff, but he hasn't paid much attention to it, and they never have come before. Well, this time they did, and they drove the British off of the positions of the redoubts. In fact, the only thing that's preventing the Russians from driving the British back into the sea entirely is a small, hastily formed up group of about 500 men under Sir Colin Campbell, the Scottish 93rd Highlanders. And they perform a kind of an unusual movement. This is the first of three major pieces of this battle that are in British lore forever for heroism and courage on the field of battle. Just to the other side of this ridge, he lines his men up in double line to face about 2,000 Russian cavalry. This is normally suicidal because in a line, the cavalry just ride around you and then attack you from the back. They're very good at that. Or they'll just ride their horses through you and puncture your line. But Colin Campbell believes that if his men use psychology and stand steady, in fact, he tells them, "You will stand in this place and die." To which they reply, "If it comes to that, I guess we will, sir." The British are great for stuff like this. That he can shatter the British or the Russian cavalry advance by pure psychology and, of course, lots and lots of bullets. Anyway, so he forms them up on the other side of this ridge so where they can't be seen. As the Russians ride up the other side, he has his men march up to the top of the ridge, and they appear as a thin red line, still known in British lore as the Thin Red Line. And the 93rd Highlanders drive 2,000 Russian cavalry back off those heights and protect the whole British Expeditionary Force. Now, while the Russians are down in this little depression, trying to gather their troops together, another great man, the Earl of Cardigan, a big guy and known for his physical courage, takes his Heavy Brigade. This is a heavy group of cavalry. The cavalry come in two stripes, heavy and light. And the heavy cavalry, they're bigger horses. They're armored, generally speaking, and they don't ride as fast. They're not meant for fast combat. These are shock troops of cavalry. They take their 200 or 300 and ride down on the 2,000 Russian cavalry that are trying to reform after throwing themselves against the Highlander positions a few minutes before. Cardigan and his huge aide, this hulking Indian adjutant that he carried with him at all times, they run by themselves straight at the enemy, outstripping the whole of their reinforcements, and crash into the enemy positions, driving themselves like a wedge deep into the Russian lines. They'll both be heavily wounded, Cardigan will sustain 7 wounds. His adjutant will get 14, yet the British will list them as having been lightly wounded in the battle. It's a British thing. But this small group of cavalry will drive 2,000 Russians off the field in complete disarray. And here comes one of the biggest blunders of the Battle of Balaclava. There'll be more in a minute. But a group of light cavalry, also part of Cadogan's regiment, are up on the heights, having been commanded to hold their positions and to defend them against all attack. Well, they have an opportunity here. As light cavalry, they're much faster than the Russians, and they could ride into the fleeing cavalry troops and just cut them to bits. But they don't. They just watch them, and the Russians manage to escape and reform in a farther valley. This is going to be a big problem a little bit later on, and one of the first of many points of confusion about what the orders were on the battlefield. The biggest one comes a moment later in the charge of the Light Brigade. This is one of the most famous moments in British military history, maybe one of the most famous moments in all of world military history. The Earl of Cadogan's light cavalry, who, remember, they haven't been in combat yet, are lined up at the mouth of this big long valley. The British used to command this part, but the Russians overran that in the morning. So now there are guns here, and guns here, and guns here. And the Light Brigade is formed at the mouth of the valley, with the main Russian position all the way at the far end, about 1.5 miles away. Orders come down from Baron Raglan, who doesn't cover himself in glory on this day, to the Light Brigade, telling them to advance on the guns. Which guns is the question? There are guns to the right. There are guns to the left. There are guns in front of them. Which guns does he mean? The main position of guns, of course, is the one all the way at the far end of the valley, and that's the one that Cardigan thinks that Raglan means. Nothing happens for a while. The Earl of Lucan, who is one of General Raglan's head advisors, sends down a terse order after he sees that the Light Brigade is just doing nothing, just sitting there waiting. They were told there was infantry support coming, but they haven't received any infantry support, so they're waiting for those guys to come up. This drives Lucan crazy, and he sends his hot-headed assistant, a man named Nolan, sends him down to the Earl of Cardigan and tells him to attack, and to attack now. Nolan and Cardigan hate each other. Nolan thinks that Cardigan is a coward, and so he commands him to attack the guns. And Cardigan says, "What guns?" And he says, Nolan says to him, "There is your enemy," pointing generally out there. "There is your enemy." So Cardigan orders his troops, his Light Brigade, to begin their charge. Usually begin at a trot. And so they start trotting down the valley, 675 of them, heading down into this deep, long valley, ringed on 3 sides by Russian artillery. Well, on one side, by captured British artillery. Nolan, seeing this happen, gallops out in front of the troops and starts gesticulating wildly, screaming something that no one can hear, because now the guns have opened up and it's so loud and so smoky that nobody can tell what happens. And just at the moment when he gets to the Earl of Cardigan to tell him what he meant, which was to take back the redoubt on the right, to attack the British guns, of which there are very few, which the Russians are carrying off the heights that they captured that morning. That's easy work for cavalry, and they should have easily been able to do that. But Cardigan didn't know that's what he meant. He couldn't see what was happening on the ridge because of the smoke. So he thought they meant the guns at the end of the valley. Nolan's about to tell him what he actually meant when a piece of shrapnel hits him in the chest, knocks him from his horse, and kills him. We'll never know if Nolan was trying to spur the troops to go faster or to tell them that they'd made a terrible mistake. Either way, Nolan's lying dead, and now the Light Brigade is charging its speed up the valley as fast as they can. Now, it's not just the Light Brigade, but also the Heavy Brigade behind them. Remember, those guys have already been in battle this morning, and they're a little bit tired, so they're lagging behind farther and farther and farther. The Light Brigade is getting all of the artillery fire, stormed at, as the poem says, stormed at with shot and shell. Boldly they rode and well, into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell rode the 600. And into the mouth of hell they did ride. It's 1.25 miles down the valley, straight into the teeth of dug-in Russian artillery. Plus, they're being attacked from the right of them, cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered, and they rode right down the middle of it into this incredible maelstrom of lead and smoke and death. The miracle is they actually made it. About halfway down the valley, the Earl of Lucan looks at the Heavy Brigade, or the Light Brigade, being just torn to bits by canister and grape shot and all of this, and decides he's not going to bring the Heavy Brigade into that, and stops. So the Light Brigade now has no reinforcements, but they're able to get all the way down the valley, and a few hundred of them are still there when they reach the Russian guns and drive the Russian cavalry off the heights. Now, guns are marvelous, big, heavy guns. They're wonderful in battle. The thing is, they aren't very maneuverable, and the troops that are manning them are very lightly armed. Generally, all they have is maybe a pistol or possibly a saber. They're no match for cavalry, and the cavalry cut the gunners to bits, sabering the gunners there. They draw their sabers and hack the gunners to bits, because if the gunners are dead, they can't fire the guns anymore. Cavalry units are not going to get off their horses and fire they don't know how to fire the guns. This is a piece of technology they're not familiar with. So they can silence the guns just by killing the gun crews. And the Light Brigade gets all the way to the end of the valley and starts killing the gun crews when the Russian cavalry realizes there's no reinforcements. This is all there is. The heavy cavalry stopped way down the valley, turned around, and went back out of range of the Russian shot. So the Light Brigade is all by itself on the heights. And then they have done the impossible by riding all the way down the valley and getting onto the guns and even pushing the Russian gun crews back from their guns. There's no reinforcements, nothing to follow it up. And in close quarters against infantry, cavalry cannot succeed. And the Russians reform and push the Light Brigade back off the guns and make them ride all the way back down the valley again. Stormed at with shot and shell, indeed. Back the 1.25 miles down the valley. Of the 670 men who rode up the valley, only 190 are left who can bear arms at the end of this. The British will lose 500 horses in this charge. It's a magnificent example of bravery, or I suppose you could say stupidity under fire. But to me, the charge of the Light Brigade, the stand of the Thin Red Line, the charge of the Heavy Brigade, is some of the most heroic and the most noble work that's ever been done on a battlefield. It was a strategic defeat for the British, and it will presage a much longer and much bloodier conflict than anybody is expecting. In fact, nobody really thought anything good would come out of that battle at all until Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote his famous poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade. A little while later, Russian composers will also write some wonderful music to accompany that as well. Battle of Balaclava, September of 1854, part of the Crimean War. This is Mr. C. I'll see you next time.